Fleet Admiral and stood before the massive viewing screen in his command center. The stars stretched endlessly before him, each one representing worlds that bowed to the Empire. For 12,000 years, his people had ruled the galaxy with an iron fist. No species had ever successfully resisted them. None ever would. The command center buzzed with activity. Hundreds of officers worked at their stations, monitoring the vast empire that spanned 3 galaxy arms. Today was like any other day in the life of the most powerful military force the universe had ever known. "Admiral," called Commander N from his communication station, "we have received a routine transmission from Deep Space Monitor Station 7. They detected a signal from the Outer Rim territories." And barely looked up from his tactical displays. The Outer Rim was filled with primitive worlds that had not yet learned to fear the Empire's might. Every few cycles, another backward planet would discover space communication and send out their first fumbling messages. It was almost amusing how predictable they were. "What sector?" he asked, his 4 eyes still focused on more important matters. "Sol System, designation Sol 3, Admiral. Yellow Star, 3rd planet. The species calls themselves humans." The Admiral finally turned his attention to the communication officer. Humans, another generic name from another unremarkable species. He had conquered so many worlds that the names began to blur together after a while. The Empire, all now served with complete loyalty after learning the price of resistance. "Display the message," and commanded. The main screen shifted to show a simple text transmission in basic galactic standard. The translation software had already converted the primitive language into something readable. The message was short and direct. "We are humanity. We know you are coming, do not." The command center fell silent for a moment. Then, a low rumble of laughter began to spread among the officers. Commander N was the first to openly chuckle, followed by the weapons officer and the navigation team. Soon, the entire bridge was filled with the sound of amusement. "Do not," repeated Commander N, his voice shaking with mirth. "Admiral, these humans appear to be giving us orders." Admiral N allowed himself a rare smile. In all his years of conquest, he had seen every type of response from newly discovered species. Some begged for mercy before the Empire even made contact. Others tried to hide, hoping they would be overlooked. A few attempted to bargain, offering resources or knowledge in exchange for independence. But this was the first time a primitive species had tried to give the Empire a direct command. "What is their technological level?" the Admiral asked. "Primitive, sir. They achieved basic space flight only recently. Their fastest ships cannot exceed 1/10 light speed. No energy shields, no plasma weapons, no quantum manipulation technology. Standard pre-space civilization." Population: approximately 8 billion individuals on the home world, with small colonies on 2 nearby planets and several space stations. Total armed forces appear to be less than 1% of population, using kinetic projectile weapons and basic chemical explosives. Admiral N nodded. It was exactly what he had expected. Another young species that had discovered radio signals from the Empire's outer territories and panicked. They probably intercepted some routine military communications and realized a massive force was expanding in their direction. Now they were trying to sound tough, hoping to scare away something they could not possibly understand or resist. "Have they sent any follow-up messages?" he asked. "No, Admiral. Just that single transmission 3 standard hours ago. Our monitoring stations report no additional communication attempts from the Sol system." The Admiral turned to his strategic planning officer. "Add Sol 3 to the conquest schedule. Standard integration protocol. Assign Conquest Fleet to handle the operation." "Yes, Admiral. Fleet is currently finishing operations in the Helix Nebula. They should be available for deployment in approximately 6 standard cycles." "Excellent. Make sure they understand this is routine. A single transmission does not indicate any significant resistance capability. And paused, then added with amusement, though they might find the humans' boldness entertaining. As the officers returned to their duties, the Admiral allowed himself a moment to consider the human message. 3 words that contained such naive confidence. Do not. As if a species that had barely learned to leave their own planet could somehow threaten an empire that had existed since before their star was born. They had perfected the art of conquest over thousands of years. Every species followed the same pattern. First came fear when they realized the empire existed. Then came desperate attempts at negotiation. Finally came submission when they understood that resistance was impossible. The humans were simply starting at step 3, trying to project strength they did not possess. The Admiral pulled up the tactical assessment of the Sol system on his personal display. 1 small yellow star, 8 planets, countless asteroids and comets. The 3rd planet was the only one capable of supporting the carbon-based life that had evolved there. The humans had managed to spread to a few other locations in their system, but their presence was fragile and limited. Conquest fleet consisted of 47 dreadnoughts and 300 support vessels. Each dreadnought could level a continent with a single weapon discharge. The support fleet included troop carriers, orbital bombardment platforms, and specialized ships designed to break any planetary defense system ever created. It was massive overkill for a primitive world, but the Empire believed in overwhelming superiority. Admiral enclosed the tactical display and returned his attention to more pressing matters. The Empire was currently managing 17 active conquest operations across the galaxy. The resistance in the Helix Nebula was proving more stubborn than expected, though their defeat was inevitable. Several other species were attempting to form some kind of alliance against expansion, not understanding that such alliances only meant they would all fall together instead of separately. He dismissed the human message from his mind. In 6 cycles, Fleet would arrive at Sol 3 and deliver the standard surrender demand. The humans would realize their mistake and submit like every other species before them. Their world would be integrated into the Empire, their people would serve interests, and their brief moment of defiance would become nothing more than a minor footnote in imperial records. After all, no species in the history of the galaxy had ever successfully resisted the Empire. These humans would be no different, despite their amusing attempt at intimidation. The Admiral had no way of knowing that this simple message would mark the beginning of the end of everything he believed about imperial supremacy. The humans had not sent a desperate bluff or an empty threat. They had sent a warning. 6 months had passed since the human message arrived at Imperial Command. Fleet Admiral and had almost forgotten about the primitive species in the Sol system. The Empire had more pressing concerns to occupy his attention. The resistance had finally been crushed in the Helix Nebula. Admiral's forces had spent 4 months systematically destroying their hidden bases and capturing their leadership. They had been particularly stubborn, using hit-and-run tactics that prolonged the conflict longer than usual. But like every other species that had opposed the Empire, they eventually learned the futility of resistance. Now Conquest Fleet was free to handle the routine integration of Sol 3. Admiral himself would command the operation, though he considered it a waste of his talents. After crushing a determined resistance movement, conquering a primitive world seemed almost insulting. Admiral, Commander N reported during the morning briefing, "Our monitoring stations have compiled their reports on the Sol system. The humans have maintained complete communication silence since their initial transmission," and looked up from his strategic displays with mild interest. Complete silence, no diplomatic overtures, no surrender negotiations. "Nothing, sir. They have gone completely quiet on all frequencies. Our deep space monitors can still detect their presence through heat signatures and electromagnetic activity, but they have stopped all external communication." This was unusual behavior, though not unprecedented. The Admiral had seen a few species retreat into isolation when they realized conquest was inevitable. Some tried to pretend they did not exist, hoping the Empire would somehow overlook them. Others used the time to prepare elaborate surrender ceremonies, believing that proper submission might earn them better treatment. "What about internal communications?" and asked. "Limited and heavily encrypted, sir. They appear to be using quantum entanglement for most of their data transmission now. Our monitoring equipment cannot intercept those signals." The Admiral frowned slightly. Quantum communication was not impossible for a primitive species to develop, but it was unusual. Most civilizations did not invest in such advanced communication technology until they had achieved interstellar travel. The humans were still confined to their home system, yet they were using communication methods that some Empire client species had not yet mastered. "Perhaps they are trying to hide their surrender preparations," suggested Commander N. "Some species become embarrassed about their initial defiance and prefer to negotiate privately." "Possibly," and agreed, though something about the situation felt different. Most species that chose private negotiation sent secret diplomatic messages, not complete silence. But he had learned not to spend too much time trying to understand the psychology of primitive civilizations. They rarely made logical decisions when faced with imperial power. Meanwhile, Admiral was preparing Conquest Fleet for deployment to the Sol system. His ships had been and refitted after the campaign. The crew was eager for a simple operation after months of difficult fighting against guerrilla forces. "Admiral," reported his intelligence officer, "Captain, we have received updated assessments of the target system. The humans appear to be conducting unusual activities on their outer planets." Glanced at the report without much interest. "What kind of activities?" "Large-scale construction projects, sir. Massive energy signatures from their gas giants and asteroid belt. However, our analysts believe this is normal industrial expansion for a developing civilization." "Of course it is," replied dismissively. "They probably detected our monitoring probes and are trying to build some kind of defense network. Primitive species always waste time on useless preparations when they should be preparing their surrender documents." The intelligence officer hesitated before continuing. "Sir, the energy levels are quite significant. Some of our scientists are having difficulty explaining the power sources required for such construction." "Captain," said firmly, "I have conquered 43 worlds in my career. Every single one of them tried to build miraculous new weapons or defenses when they learned the Empire was coming. Not one of those weapons ever functioned as intended when facing Imperial technology. These humans will be no different." The captain nodded and returned to his duties, but privately he remained troubled by the readings. The energy signatures from the Sol system were unlike anything in the Imperial database. They were not just large. They were organized in patterns that suggested advanced understanding of physics that should be impossible for such a young species. Deep space reconnaissance probes had been dispatched toward the Sol system to gather more detailed intelligence. They should arrive several days before the main fleet, providing final confirmation of human capabilities and defenses. The first probe reached the outer edge of the Sol system and immediately detected something unexpected. The entire asteroid belt between the fourth and fifth planets had been transformed into some kind of massive construction zone. Thousands of artificial structures filled the space where asteroids once drifted freely. "Admiral," the probe operator reported to, "we are receiving telemetry from Reconnaissance Probe Alpha. The asteroid belt shows signs of extensive modification." "Show me," commanded. The main screen displayed images transmitted by the probe. Where the asteroid belt should contain scattered rocks and ice, there were now geometric formations that stretched for millions of kilometers. Structures that looked like they had been grown rather than built, following patterns that hurt to look at directly. "What are those formations?" asked Captain. Unknown, sir. They do not match any known construction techniques in our database. The power readings are significant. Admiral studied the images with growing irritation. He had hoped for a simple, straightforward conquest to help his crew recover from the campaign. Instead, he was looking at evidence of construction capabilities that made no sense for a primitive civilization. "Continue probe advance," he ordered. "I want detailed scans of their and any defensive installations." But reconnaissance probe Alpha never reached the inner system. As it approached the fifth planet, it simply disappeared. One moment it was transmitting normally, the next moment its signal went dead. No explosion, no debris field, no indication of what had happened to it. "Technical malfunction?" asked hopefully. "Negative, sir. All systems were functioning normally until signal termination. The probe appears to have been removed." The Admiral ordered the deployment of 2 additional probes, approaching from different vectors. They met the same fate as the first, vanishing without trace as they neared the inner system. "Sir," Captain said quietly, "perhaps we should request additional intelligence assets before proceeding." "Absolutely not," snapped. "I will not request help to deal with a primitive species just because they got lucky with a few probe intercepts. Conquest fleet is more than sufficient for any threat these humans might present." But as the fleet continued its approach to the Sol system, strange reports continued to arrive. Long-range sensors detected energy patterns that seemed to violate known physics. Radio telescopes picked up signals that suggested massive construction projects on multiple worlds simultaneously. Most disturbing of all, the humans maintained their complete silence. No species had ever remained quiet this long when facing imperial conquest. They should be panicking, sending desperate messages, begging for negotiations. Instead, the Sol system seemed to be waiting patiently for the Empire to arrive. Admiral tried to maintain confidence in his fleet's superiority, but privately he was beginning to wonder what the humans had been doing during their 6 months of silence. Whatever it was, they had clearly not been wasting time on surrender ceremonies. The fleet was now only days away from the Sol system. Soon, they would discover exactly what humanity had been preparing for their arrival. Conquest fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system with the confidence of 12,000 years of unopposed victory. Admiral stood on his command bridge, expecting to see a primitive world cowering before imperial might. Instead, his sensors detected something that should have been impossible. "Admiral," his sensor officer reported in a voice filled with confusion, "the entire system appears to be fortified." "Fortified? Explain," demanded, though part of him already dreaded the answer. The main display screen lit up with tactical information that made no sense. Every planet in the system showed massive artificial structures. The asteroid belt they had detected earlier was just the beginning. Mars was surrounded by a ring of metal that stretched from its surface into deep space. Jupiter's moons had been connected by bridges of unknown material that formed geometric patterns around the gas giant. But it was Earth itself that truly comprehension. The third planet was enclosed in what could only be described as a sphere of pure energy and metal. Thousands of structures orbited the world in perfect formation, creating layers of defense that extended millions of kilometers into space. "How many defensive platforms?" asked Weekly. "Unknown, sir. Our sensors cannot count them accurately. The energy signatures are interfering with our scanning equipment. Conservative estimate suggests several million individual installations." Several million. Conquest fleet consisted of 47 dreadnoughts and 300 support vessels. Even if every human installation was primitive and ineffective, the sheer numbers were overwhelming. "Sir," reported the communications officer, "we are being scanned by multiple sources. The intensity suggests scanning technology superior to our own." Admiral felt a cold sensation in his chest. In 43 previous conquests, He had never encountered a species with scanning technology that matched Imperial standards, much less exceeded them. How could a primitive civilization develop such capabilities in just 6 months? "Send the standard surrender demand," he ordered. Hopping, his voice sounded more confident than he felt. The message was transmitted on all frequencies. "Primitive species of Sol 3, you are commanded to surrender unconditionally to the Empire. Resistance is futile. You have 1 standard hour to respond with your submission." For several minutes, silence filled the system. Then something happened that would haunt dreams for the rest of his life. Europa, one of Jupiter's largest moons, simply ceased to exist. There was no explosion, no debris field, no flash of weapons fire. The moon was there one moment, and the next moment there was nothing but empty space where it had been. The gravitational effects of its presence continued for a few seconds, then even those faded away as if the moon had never existed at all. "What happened to Europa?" whispered. "Unknown, sir. It appears to have been deleted from reality. I cannot explain the process by which this was accomplished." Before anyone could respond, a new message arrived from the human fleet, not transmitted through normal communication channels, but somehow broadcasted directly into the minds of every crew member on every ship in the Imperial fleet simultaneously. "You were warned. Leave now or share its fate." The voice was calm, almost gentle. It did not carry the anger or desperation that marked the communications of species facing conquest. Instead, it held the quiet certainty of someone who knew exactly what they were capable of doing. Admiral stared at the empty space where Europa had been. In 12,000 years of Imperial expansion, no weapon had ever simply erased matter from existence. Energy weapons could destroy, kinetic weapons could shatter, but nothing could make something cease to exist as if it had never been there at all. "Admiral," his tactical officer reported, "multiple human vessels are approaching our position. Energy signatures do not match any known technology." On the display screen, ships began to appear around the Imperial fleet. They did not emerge from hyperspace or approach from a distance. They simply materialized as if they had been invisible moments before. The ships themselves were unlike anything in Imperial records, smooth surfaces that seemed to bend light around them, no visible weapons or engines, moving in ways that suggested they were not bound by normal physics. "How many?" asked. 1,743 vessels detected so far, sir. More continue to appear." More than 3 times the size of the Imperial fleet, and they were still arriving. Each ship was easily the size of an Imperial dreadnought, but they moved with impossible grace and speed. "Fleet Admiral," the gentle voice spoke again inside his mind, "you have 60 seconds to begin your departure from this system. We do not wish to harm you, but we will not allow you to remain." For the first time in his career, Admiral gave an order he had never imagined speaking. "All ships, prepare for emergency hyperspace jump. We are withdrawing from the target system." "Sir," his first officer asked in disbelief. "You heard the order. Execute immediately." As Conquest Fleet fled from the Sol system, abandoning the first conquest attempt in Imperial history, Admiral tried to understand what had just happened. The humans had not just demonstrated superior technology. They had shown capabilities that seemed to violate the fundamental laws of reality itself. The news of the retreat reached Imperial Command within hours. Fleet Admiral N could barely believe the reports he was reading. An entire conquest fleet, retreating from a single primitive world without firing a shot. "This is impossible," he declared to his staff. "Admiral must be exaggerating the threat. No primitive species could have developed such capabilities in 6 months." But the sensor logs were clear. The humans had displayed technology that the Empire did not understand, wielding power that seemed to come from nowhere. More importantly, they had done exactly what they promised they would do. They had warned the Empire not to come, and when the Empire ignored that warning, they had demonstrated the consequences. Within hours, Emperor himself was informed of the unprecedented defeat. The ruler of the greatest empire in galactic history listened to the reports in growing anger. No species had ever forced imperial forces to retreat. No primitive world had ever dared to threaten the Empire's expansion. "Assemble the Annihilation Armada," the Emperor commanded. 500 dreadnoughts, reality shapers, planet killers, everything we have. These humans will learn the price of defying the Empire. "Your Majesty," ventured Admiral N, "perhaps we should attempt diplomatic contact first. The humans clearly possess unusual capabilities." "No," the Emperor roared. "The Empire does not negotiate with primitives. We do not retreat from backwater worlds. If Conquest Fleet was insufficient, then we will send a force so overwhelming that these humans will beg for the mercy of quick death." The Annihilation Armada was the Empire's ultimate weapon, reserved for enemies who threatened Imperial survival itself. It had only been deployed 3 times in 12,000 years, each time to completely erase a threat from existence. Now it would be used against a species that had been primitive just months before. As the massive fleet prepared for deployment, carrying weapons capable of destroying entire star systems, Admiral N could not shake the memory of the human message. 3 simple words that had seemed so laughable just 6 months ago. Do not. Perhaps they had not been giving the Empire an order after all. Perhaps they had been trying to save Imperial lives by warning them away from something too dangerous to approach. But it was too late for such realizations. The Empire's pride demanded vengeance, and the Annihilation Armada would deliver it no matter the cost. The humans had demonstrated their power once. Soon, they would face the full might of an empire that had conquered the galaxy. The Annihilation Armada dropped out of hyperspace like the wrath of angry gods. 500 Imperial dreadnoughts, each capable of destroying a moon with a single shot. Planet-killer weapons that could crack a world's core. Reality-shaping devices that bent the laws of physics to Imperial will. It was the largest military force ever assembled in the history of the galaxy, carrying enough firepower to sterilize entire star systems. Emperor himself commanded the fleet from his flagship, the Infinite Dominion. He had come to personally witness the destruction of the species that dared challenge Imperial authority. The humans would learn that defying the Empire carried a price beyond their imagination. "Your Majesty," reported Fleet Admiral N, "we have arrived at the Sol system. All ships report ready for immediate engagement." The Emperor studied the tactical displays with satisfaction. No force in the universe could withstand this concentration of Imperial power. The humans might have surprised a single conquest fleet, but they would find the Annihilation Armada to be an entirely different challenge. "What is the current status of human defenses?" the Emperor asked. "Unchanged from previous reports, Your Majesty. The system remains heavily fortified, but our intelligence suggests they possess perhaps 1,000 ships. Even if they are individually superior to Imperial vessels, they are outnumbered 5 to 1. Emperor nodded with cold satisfaction. "Begin the assault. I want to see these arrogant primitives broken before the day is over." The battle began with the Empire's opening salvo. 100 dreadnoughts fired simultaneously, creating a wave of destructive energy that had never failed to break any defense. The concentrated firepower was enough to crack the crust of a planet, focused on the orbital defenses around Earth. The human defensive network absorbed the entire attack without any visible effect. "Status report," the Emperor demanded. "Your Majesty, our weapons appear to have been neutralized. The human defenses show no damage whatsoever." Before the Emperor could respond, the human fleet began its counterattack. What followed shattered every assumption about warfare, technology, and the nature of reality itself. Human ships phased in and out of existence, appearing behind Imperial vessels to deliver precise strikes before vanishing again. Their weapons did not merely destroy Imperial ships, they seemed to convince matter to stop being matter, causing dreadnoughts to simply unravel at the atomic level. Evasive maneuvers, Admiral N shouted, all ships scatter formation. But the Imperial fleet's movements had been anticipated. Every tactical doctrine, every strategic formation, every combat technique the Empire had developed over 12 seemed to be already known to the human commanders. They responded to Imperial movements before the orders were even given, as if they had studied the Empire's military tactics for decades. "How are they predicting our movements?" the Emperor demanded. Admiral N was studying his tactical displays in horror. "Your Majesty, they appear to know our standard battle procedures better than we do. Every formation we attempt, they have a perfect counter. Every strategy we employ, they neutralize before we can implement it." The truth was becoming clear through the chaos of battle. The humans had not developed their capabilities in 6 months of frantic preparation. They had been studying the Empire for far longer than anyone had imagined. A message cut through the battle communications, transmitted on all Imperial frequencies. The same calm, gentle voice that had spoken to Admiral. "Children of the Empire, you are fighting yesterday's war with yesterday's tactics against an enemy that has been preparing for this moment since before you knew we existed. We intercepted your communications 60 years ago. We have studied every battle you have ever fought, analyzed every weapon you have ever used, cataloged every strategy in your military doctrine. This is not a battle. This is a demonstration." The horrifying realization hit Emperor like a physical blow. The humans had been monitoring Imperial communications for 60 years. They had watched the Empire conquer dozens of worlds, learning from every victory, studying every technique, preparing for the day when Imperial forces would inevitably arrive in their system. "Break off the attack," the Emperor commanded. "All ships withdraw to safe distance." But the human fleet was not finished with their demonstration. As Imperial ships attempted to retreat, they found themselves surrounded by vessels that had not been there moments before. Not threatened, not attacked, simply surrounded and held in place by technologies that explanation. Admiral's personal log, transmitted in real time as his ship was systematically disabled, provided a chilling perspective on the human capabilities. "Personal log, Admiral. The humans are not destroying our ships, they are taking them apart, piece by piece, system by system, as if they are conducting an educational demonstration for their own benefit. They know exactly where our weapons are located, how our shields function, what our weak points are. This is not the desperate defense of a primitive species. This is the methodical dismantling of Imperial technology by an enemy that understands it better than we do." His transmission cut off as his flagship systems were somehow convinced to stop working. The ship remained intact, but every weapon, every engine, every life support system simply ceased to function. The crew was left floating helplessly in a ship that had become nothing more than an elaborate tomb. Similar scenes played out across the Imperial fleet. Human vessels approached damaged Imperial ships not to destroy them, but to examine them. It was as if the entire battle was a field test, allowing human scientists to study Imperial technology in action. "Your Majesty," Admiral N reported, his voice shaking with disbelief, "we have lost 60% of the fleet, not destroyed, disabled. The humans appear to be capturing our vessels intact for study." Emperor watched in horror as the greatest military force in galactic history was systematically neutralized by an enemy that treated the battle like a scientific experiment. The humans were not fighting desperately for their survival, they were conducting research. Another message arrived, this time transmitted directly to the Emperor's personal communication system. "Of the Empire, you named this fleet the Annihilation Armada. Your histories record that it has only been used 3 times to erase threats to Imperial survival. We know this because we have read your histories. We have studied your culture, your psychology, your military doctrine. We know that sending this fleet represents the Empire's ultimate commitment to our destruction. We also know that you believe victory is still possible if you deploy your reality-destroying weapons. You are wrong. The human voice paused, allowing the Emperor to absorb the implications. We do not hate you, Emperor. We do not seek conquest or revenge. We simply wish to be left alone. But since you cannot grant us that simple courtesy, you force us to teach you why Earth's children needed only one message to warn you away. As if to demonstrate their point, several human vessels approached the Reality Shaper weapons devices that could unravel the fundamental forces of the universe. The humans did not destroy these ultimate weapons. Instead, they somehow convinced the weapons to turn their reality-altering effects on themselves, creating localized zones where the laws of physics simply stopped applying. Emperor realized that he was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. Not the defeat of an Imperial fleet, but the casual demonstration that Imperial technology was as primitive to the humans as stone tools would be to the Empire. The humans had not been lying in their first message. They had known the Empire was coming. More than that, they had been preparing for this specific confrontation for decades, studying their enemy with the patience of a species that understood the true meaning of long-term planning. The Emperor gave the order he never thought would pass his lips. All remaining ships, emergency hyperspace jump. We are abandoning the field. As the remnants of the Annihilation Armada fled from the Sol system, Emperor finally understood what the humans had been trying to tell his empire 6 months ago. They had not sent a threat, they had sent a mercy. News of the Annihilation Armada's destruction spread across the empire like wildfire. For the first time in 12,000 years, Imperial forces had not just been defeated, they had been systematically dismantled by an enemy that treated the Empire's ultimate weapon as a minor inconvenience. Panic began to spread through the Imperial territories. On dozens of worlds, subject species whispered of rebellion. The Empire's aura of invincibility had been shattered by a species that most Imperial citizens had never heard of until this moment. Emperor sat in his throne room, surrounded by the greatest military minds the Empire had ever produced. All of them were silent, unable to offer any strategy that might restore Imperial dominance. The humans had demonstrated capabilities that existing Imperial doctrine could not address. Your Majesty, Fleet Admiral said carefully, perhaps it is time to consider negotiation. The humans have shown they possess superior technology, but they have also demonstrated restraint. They could have destroyed our fleets entirely, yet they chose to disable them instead. Negotiation. The Emperor's voice rose in fury. The Empire does not negotiate with primitives. We do not bow to species that were using stone tools when our civilization was already ancient. But privately, knew that everything had changed. The humans were not primitive, and perhaps they never had been. The evidence suggested they had been monitoring Imperial communications for 60 years, learning and preparing with a patience that spoke of wisdom far beyond their apparent age as a civilization. There is one option remaining, Your Majesty, suggested Admiral X, commander of the Empire's Special Weapons Division, the Reality Destroyers. The throne room fell silent. Reality Destroyers were weapons so dangerous that even the Empire feared to use them. They did not merely kill or destroy, they unraveled the fundamental structure of existence itself, erasing matter and energy from the universe as if they had never existed. The risk, Admiral began. The risk is acceptable, the Emperor interrupted. If we cannot conquer these humans, then we will erase them completely. Reality Destroyers will eliminate their entire star system from existence. They cannot defend against weapons that attack the nature of reality itself. Within hours, the order was given. 3 Reality Destroyer vessels, each containing weapons capable of unmaking entire solar systems, were dispatched toward the Sol system. This time, there would be no fleet engagement, no demonstration of force. The humans would simply cease to exist. But when the reality destroyer fleet arrived at the edge of the Sol system, they found humanity waiting once again. The same calm voice that had spoken to previous Imperial forces now addressed not just the weapon fleet, but every world in the Empire simultaneously. Somehow, the humans had managed to broadcast their message to every inhabited planet under Imperial rule. People of the Empire, your leaders have chosen to deploy weapons that can destroy the fabric of reality itself, rather than accept that their age of conquest has ended. Before these weapons are used, you deserve to understand what your empire has truly been fighting. The voice paused, and across 1,000 worlds, beings who had lived their entire lives under imperial rule listened to words that would change everything they believed about their place in the universe. We are not the primitive species your empire 60 years ago. We are their children, their descendants, born and raised with one purpose: to ensure that when the empire finally came for Earth, it would be the empire that broke upon our shores, not us upon yours. The revelation hit the empire like a physical blow. For 60 years, an entire human civilization had been shaped by the knowledge that imperial conquest was inevitable. Every child born, every technology developed, every strategic decision made, all of it focused on preparing for this single moment. Your weapons cannot destroy what you do not understand. Your tactics cannot defeat an enemy that has spent 3 generations learning to counter them. Your empire cannot conquer a species that has dedicated its entire existence to ensuring your defeat. On the bridge of the lead reality destroyer, Admiral K prepared to fire the weapons that would erase the Sol system from existence. "Target the system's star," he commanded. "If we eliminate their sun, the entire system will cease to exist." The reality destroyers activated, sending waves of pure negation toward the Sol system's yellow star. These weapons had never failed. They attacked existence itself at the quantum level, convincing reality that their targets had never been. The weapons reached their target and simply stopped working. "Status report," Admiral K demanded. "Sir, the weapons appear to have malfunctioned." "No, that's not correct. They activated successfully, but their effects were before reaching the target." On his display screen, Admiral K could see the impossible: waves of reality-destroying energy being absorbed and neutralized by defenses that should not have been able to affect such weapons. The humans had somehow learned to defend against attacks on reality itself. The final human message arrived, broadcast not just to the Empire but to every inhabited world in the galaxy. "Emperor, you have now deployed every weapon in your arsenal against a single star system. You have learned that overwhelming force cannot defeat superior preparation, that ancient technology cannot overcome focused evolution, that imperial arrogance cannot conquer strategic patience." The voice that had remained calm throughout every confrontation now carried a note of finality. "The Empire's choice is simple: withdraw beyond the galactic barrier and never return, or learn why humanity needed only one message to seal your doom. We did not threaten you because we feared you. We warned you because we knew exactly what we were capable of doing to you, and we were trying to spare you from that fate." Emperor, faced with the complete failure of every weapon the Empire possessed, finally understood the true meaning of that first, simple message. It had not been a desperate bluff from a primitive species. It had been a warning from apex predators who had been trying to save imperial lives by encouraging retreat. The humans had spent 60 years becoming the perfect counter to imperial expansion. Every human born in those decades had been raised knowing that their purpose was to ensure the Empire's defeat. An entire civilization had been transformed into a weapon designed specifically to break imperial power. "Send the withdrawal order," the Emperor commanded quietly. All Imperial forces will retreat beyond the galactic barrier immediately. Sol 3 is to be classified as permanently off-limits. As Imperial forces began their retreat from every frontier, abandoning conquests that had taken centuries to achieve, rebellions erupted across the Empire. Species that had served for thousands of years suddenly remembered what freedom meant. The Empire's power had been broken not by military defeat, but by the demonstration that imperial supremacy was an illusion. Within months, the mighty Empire had collapsed into dozens of independent worlds, each choosing its own destiny for the first time in. The greatest empire in galactic history had been destroyed not by invasion or revolution, but by the simple revelation that their power had limits. And in the Sol system, humanity returned to silence. They had sent their message to the galaxy. We do not seek conquest. We do not desire empire. We ask only to be left alone. But if you cannot grant us that simple courtesy, you will discover why Earth's children needed only one warning to end an empire that had endured for 12,000 years. The message had been delivered. The lesson had been learned. And across the galaxy, intelligent species began to understand that sometimes the greatest mercy is a simple warning. Do not. Humanity had spoken once. They would not need to speak again.